I'm Liz from Liz at Midlife. When I was 18 years old, I met and married the man of my dreams and moved from the Midwest to San Francisco, California. We had a small apartment on the corner of Bush and Jones, and I finished my college degree and worked there for several years before we bought a house and moved out to the suburbs. And I loved living in San Francisco. There were some very interesting and unique things there that were very different from a girl from a small town in the Midwest. Every morning I would get up very early because I had a job at a bakery and we opened at 7, so I needed to be there at 6. And so I would be up at 4:30 in the morning and would walk down the hill from our apartment down to Market Street and catch the first train of the day out to the avenues where I would open the bakery and then go on to school. And then when my classes were done, I'd come home at night. And I would take the cable car home. I commuted by cable car for part of the way. I took the California Street cable car up the hill to Nob Hill, which is where the Fairmont Hotel and the Mark Hopkins are. And because I was a history major, I'd taken a California history class, and I knew a lot about the history of San Francisco. So most of the people in the cable car, except me, were tourists. And I would start giving tours on the way home. I'd say, and here on your left is the Bank of America building, what actually started as the Bank of Italy building. It was started by A.P. Giannini. Let's start over, shall we? Howdy, I'm Liz from Liz at Midlife. When I was 18 years old, I met and married the man of my dreams and left my small town in the Midwest for the big lights and bright city, big city bright lights? Yeah, big city bright lights of San Francisco, California, where my husband was from. We had a small apartment on the corner of Bush and Jones Street, and over the next few years we lived there while I finished my college degree. And my husband worked in the newly forming computer industry in California. And it was a great time and place to be living in San Francisco. There were lots of unique things and different things for a girl from the small town in the Midwest. And let's start again, shall we? Howdy. I'm Liz from Liz at Midlife. When I was 18 years old, I met and married the man of my dreams and left my small town in the Midwest for the bright lights and big city of San Francisco, California, where my husband was from. We got a very, very small studio apartment in San Francisco at the corner of Bush and Jones. And we lived there for several years while I finished my college education, and my husband was working in the newly developing personal computer industry, dealing with Macintosh computers. And it was a great time to be in San Francisco. We were young and childless and having fun. And we worked a lot of long hours, and I would get up very early in the morning, about 4:30, because I opened a bakery at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had to be there at 6. So I would get up and get dressed and go down the hill to Market Street and catch the train out to the avenues and work and go to classes and then come back to the financial district and commute home by cable car. If you've ever seen pictures of the San Francisco cable cars, they are fun to ride on, and I would be the only local on the car with all the tourists on the California Street line. And because I was a history major, I'd taken a class in California history, and I knew a lot of the history of the area. So I would just start spontaneously giving tours to the tourists on the cable car and say, and on your left, here's the Bank of America building. A.P. Giannini founded the Bank of Italy, which later became the Bank of America. And it was a lot of fun. When we got to the top of Nob Hill, I would get off the cable car and walk downhill to our apartment. Now, the hills of San Francisco are famous for a reason. They are incredibly steep. And at the top of Nob Hill, when you got to my stop, you literally could not see the sidewalk going downhill below you until you were right over it. It was so steep that there were grooves cut in the sidewalk so that you wouldn't lose your footing. Because if you took a tennis ball or an orange, as I found out occasionally when I was carrying home groceries, and dropped it there, it would roll all the way downhill, blocks and blocks and blocks, all the way to Market Street. Or if you dropped it on the other side of the hill, all the way to the bay. So I would very carefully creep down the 2 blocks to our apartment, and in the morning, get up and do the same thing all over again for several years. And you think of big cities as being filled with people, but when you're on the street at 4:30 in the morning, there's nobody there. You really feel like you own the place. And it was a wonderful feeling to walk down to Market Street every day and not see anybody until I got almost to Market Street. I had my own bum. Now they're properly called homeless people, but at the time I considered him a bum. I had $1 for him every day. He was always sleeping in the same doorway. I did make the mistake while I was living in San Francisco of reading Stephen King's book, It. I don't want to ruin it for you, but Pennywise the clown lurks inside a storm drain and pulls a small child in, and the child is never seen again. It's kind of a scary book, and after I read that book and was walking downhill in San Francisco in the dark, I had to come up with a new path that avoided the storm drains on either side of the street. It was kind of a serpentine zigzag path after that. But I loved living in San Francisco. And after a few years, we had the money to buy a house, which we did, and we moved out to the suburbs and became commuters. And we still worked in San Francisco. So we were there on the afternoon of October 17th, 1989. You World Series fans may have been watching television when the big earthquake hit. We were working together for a design firm in downtown San Francisco, and we're trying to leave the office early to avoid the traffic that happens when any major event in a big city is going on, like the World Series. And we were on our way out the door when one of our coworkers stopped my husband and asked him a question. And I realized this was going to take a few minutes, so I said, I'll just run to the bathroom while you take care of this. And that's where I was when the 6.9 earthquake hit. I was sitting on the toilet. And this earthquake seemed to last for a long time. It was kind of a rolling amusement park ride of an earthquake. And the woman in the stall next to me started screaming immediately and didn't stop. And I, instead of screaming, was concentrating on the practical. My main intention was to get my pants up so that when the building collapsed on top of me, they found me fully dressed. I wanted to at least not be a naked corpse. So I'm pulling up my pants as the woman in the next stall is screaming, and eventually left the stall, ran out the door, and I'm thinking to myself, I bet she didn't have her pants pulled up. I don't honestly remember if I washed my hands. I might have done. I'm into personal cleanliness, but, you know, it was an earthquake. So I stepped out of the door of the bathroom and discovered that the bathroom was the only place in the building that had light because all the power was out. And one of my coworkers was standing there like this. I mean, literally. Well, one of the things that we were in charge of at the design firm was data backup. It was the early days of computers, and we were just beginning to realize how important data backup was. So when I realized that the power had gone out, my first thought, and the thing I said to Glenn was, Glenn, did you have time to save your work? And Glenn went to maniacal giggling, which I can only attribute to shock, and he sort of wandered away giggling. So I located my husband, who had been under the desk for much of the earthquake, and we went outside the building because it had been making horrible squeaking noises. We all later came to fear the words unreinforced masonry and considered ourselves fortunate that the building, in fact, had not collapsed on us, and stood on the sidewalk in front of the building looking around, and we could see that there was a big fire somewhere over there, big fire somewhere over there, and strangely enough, the traffic on the Bay Bridge was not moving. It was a very surreal experience to go from everyday life to being in the center of a disaster area. I was very grateful in the end that I was in the bathroom and not on the Bay Bridge, which if we had left on time, we would have been. And part of the Bay Bridge, as you probably remember, collapsed. We had a lot of aftermath to deal with after the earthquake. We were all stuck there. And for those of you who are so plugged in now and have access to a phone or a laptop, a portable computer, all times, you have to remember that not a lot of people had cell phones in those days. There weren't any portable computers that didn't need to be plugged into power. We were fortunate that we had people who still had transistor radios that were battery powered, because everybody was gathered around them on the sidewalk trying to figure out how bad it was. When you're in the middle of a disaster, you really don't know. Phones are down, power's out. There isn't a lot of official communication. So we had a lot of follow-up to do. We managed to bypass the phone system at the office and find an old-fashioned handset, and people were able to call and tell their relatives that they were okay and figure out where they were going to meet up and how they were going to get home. And we ended up going home with a friend who lived in San Francisco, because at that time we were living out in the suburbs and quickly realized we weren't going to be able to get there. So it took us about 2 hours to drive 12 blocks because there was a mass exodus from downtown San Francisco of the 1 million or so people who work there. And they were all trying to get places, and the roads were filled with people walking and driving home. And Malcolm didn't have any power at his apartment, so we went down to his local hangout on Polk Street, which happened to be a gay bar. And at this time, I was 22 years old and just barely legal. So I was able to get into the bar, not that they were really checking IDs that day. Sat down at the bar while my husband and Malcolm went to investigate the pool table, which had candles all around it. The bartender handed me a giant plastic cup filled to the rim with alcohol, without asking. It was just one of those days. And the man next to me turned to me and introduced himself. I was the only woman in this gay bar, and he said, "Hi, I'm Bell Pepper." I said, "Bell Pepper, can I pinch your stem and see how fresh you are?" And suddenly the only woman in the gay bar fit right in. It was a very interesting and unusual experience to be there. Power was out in most of San Francisco. People would run their cars and leave the radio on, and we would gather around and listen to the latest update, and more people were needed here to unbury people in this building, and don't go this way, this road is blocked, and the marina's on fire. And I remember sitting there on the sidewalk really late at night before the police came and closed down all the bars, and I looked up at the sky. Power was out all over San Francisco, and you could see the stars. And I thought to myself, with all the light pollution that San Francisco has these days, you're probably never going to see the stars like this again. Thanks for watching.